I mean, you're never going to win everybody over. Just recently, when asked what their least favorite thing about Bad Yogi is, someone literally said Erin. It's like, okay. So, I mean, it's impossible to make everyone happy. And the best thing you can do is just feel that fear, do it anyway, because the people who will resonate with you, like we touched on at the beginning, those people are only going to resonate with the most authentic version of you, not the watered down version, not the fake over the top version, but the most real, the most authentic.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Hello, Savannah listeners. Welcome back to the Savannah Podcast. We have an awesome guest in store for you today. Before I introduce her, I just want to thank all of you who've left rating and reviews on iTunes. It helps us out so much, and it really helps other people who are trying to improve their life through yoga and meditation find the show. So even if iTunes isn't how you usually tune in, we would love to hear how we're doing with a review down below. It means so much to me. Now, today we have an atypical yogi on the show with me. She is Erin Motz, the co-founder of Bad Yogi. Yes, she's a wine drinker, she's a cheese eater, and she really believes that yoga is for everyone. She's also the creator of the Perfect Body Yoga program, which is centered around the belief that the perfect body is simply the healthiest version of the body you already have. Today, she's going to be giving us tips on how to know if you're pushing yourself too hard or not enough on the yoga mat. I know this is something I wonder about myself, and it's a question my own students ask me all the time. She's also going to be telling us how to integrate the principles of self-improvement while loving yourself at the same time. How to strike all these delicate balances. Erin, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to chat all things yoga and Bad Yogi and everything in between.
Awesome. I'm so excited to have you here. So we need to cover this whole Bad Yogi thing. So you are not vegan, correct? And and tell us what other ways you consider yourself not stereotypically the average yogi. Because I think there's an interesting thing here about the stereotypes that go along with having maybe a yoga or a spiritual practice.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think it's kind of interesting because I started teaching a really long time ago. I was 17 when I started teaching. So this was like almost 13 years ago now. And it was a totally different time then, I think, for the yoga world. I mean, it was like every yogi that I had ever met was male for the most part. And the women that were there, pretty much everybody in general, but especially the women, like there was such a particular image that they embodied, and pretty much my whole early teaching career, I really tried to emulate them. I tried to be like them so hard. And of course, that's a terrible idea. But, when you're young, that's what you do. And, so this like whole culture of kind of green juice loving, kale eating, vegan, everything, it didn't really vibe with me. But I just so did not want to be labeled a hypocrite or, a heretic. I didn't want to be labeled that way. And I really tried to just squeeze into their definition of what it meant to be a yogi. And I mean, if you fast forward a little bit of time, I just realized when I was like out of college, I was working my regular job. I'd always taught yoga on the side, but when I was working my job in finance, I decided I was going to quit to teach yoga full time. And when I did that, I was thinking, I really can't keep pretending to be this person that I'm not, that's just going to end in failure really fast. So I just embraced who I was. I kind of laid it all out there. I went into class being the awkward individual that I am. I was vocal about the fact that I wasn't vegan. I wasn't even vegetarian. I didn't drive a Prius. I had no intent to drive a Prius. I am not the most upstanding citizen when it comes to like constantly doing the right ecological thing. I mean, I don't know. It was like, there were so many things, of course I ate cheese. I drank wine. I didn't really get kombucha, like there were just I felt like everything that was so typical in the wellness and yoga world, I just kind of like didn't really get. And the more I kind of put that out there, the more I saw how many people felt the same way. And I was hiding this for a long time. And then I was like, you know what? I have to own it. Like, I am just going to step into this fully. And yeah, I'm not a good yogi. I am a bad yogi. And it's tongue in cheek, because obviously it's like, clearly we are not bad people. It's just, we are kind of a little bit outside of this particular box. So I guess what makes me a bad yogi is kind of everything. It's like now a lot of that is more common, so like not everyone is vegan, but it still like rubs people the wrong way. So I think it's just, this is who I am. But I think by being someone who stands up and says, this is who I am, it allows space for other people to say, oh yeah, me too.
Right. It rubs some people the wrong way. At the same time, you have a huge audience and following, and it's attracted those correct people to you. This is something I talk about all the time in my yoga teacher training with my students, is that I think so many of us as yoga teachers, we feel this pressure to emulate our teachers, or we feel this pressure to be a certain way. And the only way you're really going to connect with your true tribe of students is by authentically being yourself. So I really admire all your work, because it's scary to put yourself out there and say, you know what? Yoga is profound. It's changed my life. It's a huge part of my practice, but it doesn't mean that I necessarily fit all these other qualities that have come, to be associated with what it means to be a yogi. And that's okay. I'm okay with that. How has also the role, do you think, of, and I'm going to dive into some of the other questions I mentioned, but how do you think the role of also just social media has changed everything with yoga in the past 10 or so years? I just am curious to hear your riff on that.
Man, yeah, I think it's so different. I almost wonder, I'm kind of thinking out loud about this, I guess, but I almost wonder if like I said, when I first started, I was totally like the freak, everybody who did yoga was a certain way and I was different. Now it kind of feels like a lot of people are more on the different side. Like a lot of people have a burger once in a while. A lot of people drive a Jeep,
Right. Yoga's gone so mainstream. I mean, even if we just look at the proliferation of yoga pants, right? It's like not even for yoga anymore.
Exactly. Totally. So it's like, I almost feel like social media has, in a sense, made it more accessible, because you're seeing so many people doing yoga, teaching yoga, and so many, not just people like, people from Russia, people from America. It's people's shapes, bodies, races, culture, everything. So it's kind of like, oh, wow, I didn't know that this whole world of yoga even existed until social media came out, right? Unless you just, whatever your city was is kind of what represented the yoga community to you. So, I definitely think it has made it more accessible. It's also, in some way, in another way, it's made it like a circus because there's so much inaccessible yoga out there kind of being paraded as normal, what I would consider like very acrobatic, unnecessary type of stuff. So, it goes both ways. I think it has a positive influence and then a weird influence, like a lot of other social media.
Right. And it's definitely proliferated this stereotype of what the typical yogi believes in. So my next question for you is, based on what you've shared so far, I want to ask, for you, is it really yoga is just a physical practice, or do you consider it a spiritual practice for you as well? And what does that more spiritual, personal side look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think in terms of my teaching style, I definitely teach mainly the physical side. Personally, I do think yoga is a spiritual practice, like in its nature it is. However, I do think that it doesn't have to be. So the way I think of myself as a yoga teacher is I'm kind of like the gateway drug into yoga. It's like you want your kid to eat the broccoli, but it's not going to eat the broccoli unless you smother it in cheese. I am the cheese for a lot of people. Okay. So I think people who often feel like, yoga's really not for me. I don't know. It's kind of woo woo. It's a little out there. I'm not really sure if yoga's for me. Like when they find bad yogi, they're like, oh, I feel like I can do this. So that's my aim in teaching is I want you to feel like you can do this. And then I'll give you a little woo woo as we go. But still in like an accessible, relatable, applicable to your daily life kind of way, because I think that is the kind of practice, that's the kind of physical practice, that's kind of spiritual practice that actually sticks with you. The thing that you feel you can adhere to, the thing that you want to adhere to, the thing that makes you feel great. So even in like meditation, it's like that. I do think there's a spiritual element to that for me. Even some people consider their meditation their prayer, you know? So it's like, I think it depends who you ask, but for me, it is both. It's physical and it's spiritual, but I usually teach first the physical side. And then I slowly just, you know, I drop the spirituality in as you go along with me.
Awesome. So I know you have this program called the Perfect Body Yoga Program, which I know is also a little bit tongue in cheek, and it ties in perfectly with this idea of focusing on the physical a little bit first to just maybe get people to relate to what it is that you're sharing. I think a lot of us struggle with this concept that we want to improve, we want to get better, we want to make sure we're working out and working hard, but at the same time, we don't want to push ourselves too hard, and the yoga practice really teaches self-acceptance, self-love. And I get asked all the time, and I'm sure you do too, especially because yoga is such a personal practice. You're alone on your mat, and it's not really like going to a boot camp, especially for people who practice at home. How do they know when they're pushing themselves too hard, and maybe they need to be pushing themselves a little bit harder on the mat?
Yeah. So I think I'm gonna give like a kind of at first glance a cheesy answer, but then I'll explain a little bit, because I think we have this phrase in yoga that we use all the time, but now it's even become more of a mainstream phrase, and that's listen to your body, which again is like, okay, duh, so obvious. But what that actually means, I think, is like the deeper answer to that. So it's like, oh, listen to your body. Okay, well, my body doesn't know. And of course, in yoga, we have this pain, discomfort threshold that we're often reminded to pay attention to. And I think that's a pretty good one to go based on, you know. But then again, it kind of goes even further, where I think we can even take it into like an energetic level. So here I get a little hippie, okay? It's like the energetic level of that question is like, okay, what I'm doing right now, let's take a class, for example, you know, you are practicing at home and you're doing your favorite sequence. Physically, where's that pain, discomfort barrier? Like, in a literal way, I always think that if you're feeling like in the meat of a muscle, are you feeling a little bit of tension and tightness in a muscle when you're stretching it or moving it, then that's generally okay. But of course, pain and something that's kind of flashing, especially in joints or in your neck, like back off. Energetically, like I started to say, this to me means, is this energizing me? Like, even though I might be tired doing this thing, I'm doing this sequence and I'm sweating and my legs are shaking and I feel my core is kind of on fire, but am I energetically feeling good? Am I feeling like accomplished and proud? That feeling is what's going to take you to progress. But when you're doing something and you feel depleted, you feel like this has just like drained you, and you want nothing to do after this sequence that you're doing or whatever it is that's exerting your energy. If it's depleting you, to me, that means that, okay, that isn't going to take you to real progress. That's going to drain you. So that's the energetic element that I think is really important to pay attention to beyond that pain discomfort threshold.
And that's interesting too, because I think it's an interesting frame to put on whether it's your yoga or a different type of workout. We're going to talk about integrating yoga with other workouts and stuff in a minute, but this lens that this should be something that when you finish, you feel energized, uplifted, good. Because I know sometimes I do a really hard yoga class or workout or combo thereof, and I feel amazing, but it's like, I want to sit down now for the rest of the day with my legs up, And it's interesting because listening to what you're saying, it seems like that scenario is maybe taking it too far.
And I think it depends on the person. So I think I'll use myself as an example, because obviously between the two of us, I know myself better. So I remember this, I had a couple years ago, I took a Orange Theory class. I don't know if you're familiar with Orange Theory, but it's basically like circuit training where you do cardio like on a treadmill, and then you switch to a rowing machine, and then there's like a weights segment. And it's an hour class approximately, and it's a very challenging class. But the first time I did it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. I felt so like energized and alive after this class. It was amazing. And same with most yoga classes I've done or I teach. I always feel like, yes, like I could do the rest of my day. Like I can go about the rest of my day and I feel good. Like my legs might be a little tired, but in my mind, I feel like sharp, feel good. I feel hydrated. Like I feel like I took care of myself after class and I was able to take care of myself during and after. And I think like there have been many times where instead of that feeling of like, yes, I feel so good, I come home and I just feel like I can't focus on anything. I don't want to leave my chair. I just want to sit here and I barely want to eat. Like then, yeah, like that is that point of, maybe there was a point where I could have backed off a little bit and I might have been able to. Now, I think for myself, I consider myself by default, like my vice is total slothness. Okay. So if I had the chance, if I had the opportunity to just like stay seated all the time, I would. So I need that push. Whereas I think people who maybe are a little more type A, maybe are a little bit more, I'll use the word aggressive with themselves. I think those kinds of people need to be careful because instead of pushing it even more, you might need to be like, oh, I need to take my foot off the gas.
Right. And I share that tip with people all the time too, which is that the type of yoga or the style of exercise you're most innately attracted to may not be what you need. And I think another big tip for folks here is that, it's different day to day. I mean, if you had a great 8 or 9 hour sleep, the Orange Fitness class or Orange Theory, class, and I do know what it is. I'm too scared to try it, but I might now after this podcast, that you might do that and feel fantastic after because your body was in a great place. But if you force yourself to that class, maybe after a long plane ride or after a stressful week, it's not the best fit, which is why we need to be so tuned in and back to this idea of listening to your body, which can sound so woo-woo, but it's like you almost need to do that check-in with yourself first to even know what workout or what direction you want to pursue. And that was sort of the next thing I wanted to ask you about, because I know you're very vocal about you love yoga, you teach yoga, it's your life and career, but it's not the only type of fitness you do. And I think that's more and more typical for almost everyone who's practicing yoga. It's not like this is the only workout we're doing. Either we're walking or we're hiking or we're doing, Soul Cycle or CrossFit or, all these other things. So how do you integrate them and how do you advise your students to?
So I actually have a very simple formula for this. All right. And I think it's so true about like, now that yoga is so popular, it's like a lot of us don't just identify as a quote unquote yogi. It's like that's yoga is part of what we do, but we're not necessarily like, oh, I'm a yogi, right? So it is true. A lot of us do a lot of stuff. And for me, I think that the kind of like I said earlier, the best schedule, if you want to call it, is the one that you can actually stick to. And for me, I have found that means there's no science behind this. It's strictly like what I want to do. I do strength training with weights every other day. I mean, every other day, that's it. It's not even like, okay, this specific schedule because of this scientific reason. No, I need a break between workouts because I just mentally, I don't feel like going 2 days in a row. And then on my in-between days is when I do yoga. And even after every single workout, I do like a few sun salutations or like hip openers if that feels good. And that's kind of the guiding light to my routine is what would feel really good right now. I've gotten into the routine, the habit of going to the gym and incorporating yoga in the in-between days, but it's kind of like around that, what would feel really good. So if my yoga practice on an in-between day is just like, I just don't feel like it, I'm just going to do 15 minutes and call it a day. If I'm feeling particularly motivated, I do more. So I really do allow my gut, my desire to kind of drive it. And again, I think you can allow your desire to drive it once you've established a routine. So establishing a routine is big, whatever that means for you. If it's Monday, Wednesday, Friday, if it's Tuesday, Thursday, or if it's just on weekends, whatever it is, commit yourself to it and make it non-negotiable. And that's been the game changer for me is, okay, this is as important as scheduling an appointment with someone else. Like if I haven't been to the dentist in 2 years and I make an appointment, I'm going to make that appointment unless something crazy happens. And I treat these fitness activities the same way. It's like, no, I'm committed to this for myself and I'm not just going to miss it for anything. So I think that's a big thing with fitting it in is make it non-negotiable and make it something that you can actually stick to.
Here's another controversial question. Is yoga enough? I get asked this all the time, but I think what people really want to know, especially those newer to the practice, is yoga enough? Or do I also need to be doing cardio or, like you said, strength training? What's your belief there?
Ooh, yeah, it is a controversial question. I know that I'm not going to bring everyone along with me with my answer, and that's fine. I think the first thing is that it depends on your goals. So if you're like, I really want a very defined body and I want to gain muscle mass, no, yoga is not going to be enough. You need more resistance there. But if you need stress relief, you want to feel healthy, you want to feel balanced, you feel tight in general, and you want to gain a little strength and flexibility, like, yeah, yoga is good, especially if you're doing it regularly. So that's the thing too. It's like 1 hour a week, it probably isn't going to allow you to gain a whole lot on the physical side. I think it could do plenty. It could be something. It could do something for stress relief, for anxiety. But again, you need a regular routine. And I think that's the biggest thing, is that yoga can be enough, depending on your goals, number one. And two, if you have a routine. So again, it's just like, that's the thing. You have to establish something non-negotiable, something that you will stick to, because that's what gets you true results, regardless of what kind of results you're looking for.
Right. Yeah. I also think that for me personally, I love integrating some kind of cardio practice or something where my heart rate is very high consistently, whether it's running or a dance class or something a few times a week, because the reality is yoga doesn't give you that unless you're doing Bikram, in which case I think there's one pose in the middle of class. You know the one, it's like the Warrior 3 with the arrow with your arms ahead of you, where they say your heart rate is as high as if you were running or something like that. Tell us a little bit more about how you talk to people in your Perfect Body yoga program, and this idea that the perfect body is the healthiest version of the body you have. How do you know what the healthiest version of the body you have is? And I want you to riff more on us on this concept of self-love, because this word self-love gets tossed around all the time in yoga, but it's like, how do we actually practice it? How do we actually do it? And how does it tie into body image? Because I think that's huge for people. Absolutely.
So it's true that like what's healthiest, quote unquote healthiest, is kind of subjective to every person, you know? I mean, what means healthy to me might be a different definition, a different picture than what you might picture or what somebody else might picture who's listening. So, but ultimately, I think like let's not even consider, for this particular conversation, we won't even consider at the moment like blood tests or something. But how do I feel living in my body? What does that feel like? What does that experience feel like? And to me, that's the definition of health I'm after in this particular case, where it's like, okay, we all have those moments where we kind of fall off the wagon doing anything good for ourselves, and we feel lethargic, and we feel like we have aches and pains, and we feel like we've added a little extra fluff for not a good reason, or, you know, any number of things. We feel a little out of shape, as they say. And to me, this isn't a bad place to be sometimes. Like, yeah, we indulge and life is good and that's great. But after a while, we start to feel like, oh, I really want to get back into doing something. And so health is this feeling to me. Health is feeling like, oh, I feel good. I feel like I can rest easy. I feel like I'm taking care of myself. I feel like I'm not bloated. I feel like my clothes fit comfortably. I feel like I'm eating well and I crave things that are good for me and nourishing for me. So to me, health is a feeling in this case. And within the Perfect Body Yoga program, we talk a lot about this. And what I love this, people are always posting. We have a private Facebook group, so people will post like their no scale victory, you know, like I brought up, you know, all these groceries up 3 flights of stairs, just one trip, you know, this kind of thing. Or their dog ran out the backyard and they ended up running like 1.5 miles to go get the dog. And it's like these things where it's when health is actually applied to your life. Like in Orange Theory, I love those classes. They were great when I took them, but some of the stuff we did in there just doesn't apply to my life. Like I'm probably not going to have to row 500 meters anytime soon, anywhere on a lake somewhere. But the applicable part to that is, you know, when, yeah, maybe you can run a mile that you couldn't have before. And it's the same within PBYP. It's like when I created that program and I was doing those classes, I was coming out of a really like a difficult place for me personally. I had moved to France not too long ago and I had lost kind of connection with my purpose. And so creating this course and doing it and testing it reconnected me to that. So not only was I feeling better in my mind, but I didn't eat pizza every day because I was testing out this program, and I was committed to my practice because I was testing out this program. And it kind of brought me back to myself. It reminded me that I'm capable of these things, and I was capable of making change while still appreciating what I had. So even while I was making these changes, both in my diet and to my physical body while I was testing it, I was still appreciating myself as I was. So there wasn't this feeling of like, well, you're crap now until you get to your goal or something like that. So I think that's the element of what is healthiest. It's how do I feel in my body and how do I feel in my life as I am now?
And is the program primarily yoga classes, or is it a combo of yoga classes and meal plans and other fitness type exercises? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So it's all yoga. It's all scheduled out too. So it's like, you don't have to think about, oh, when am I going to do this? It's all scheduled for you. So it is yoga 5 days a week with one walking day and one rest day. And then at the end of the week, there's a kind of an extended meditation. So they're usually like 10 minutes or so, the meditations for the weekend. And so yeah, it's a good balance. So it's like, okay, I've got my yoga 5 days a week, but then you have this kind of rest and recovery period that allows you to soak in what you did throughout the week. The other thing is that the classes are only 30 minutes long. So that's another thing, is that I am just not going to be that person that is going to do yoga for like a solid 75 minutes every day. That's just not going to be me on most days, you know? And so I think time is so huge because all of us are busy. We all have things to do. And that's another thing, is that we don't feel healthy in our body or in our mind when we're guilt tripping ourselves for not having the time to do yoga, you know, because we feel like we have to take 75 minutes or an hour and do something and go to a studio, you know, or like take the time to figure out what you're going to do when you're at home by yourself. And so it's like, it's accessible in time, and you have this huge supportive community, and you have a little bit of the mental, spiritual aspect as well as the physical practice. So it's a little bit, and yes, there is a food element, but I don't tell you what to eat. It's guidelines. So it's in your hands. It's in your control. You just have kind of a template, a baseline to guide you in the right direction.
You mentioned a little word that I wanted to bring up before we let you go for sure, which is the word guilt. So I think one of the things that's really fun about talking to you is just how self-assured and how confident you are in the way you like to practice and share the practice and talk about the practice. And, you know, I know you don't like to use the Sanskrit words and all these things. And I think a lot of people feel guilty, right? Like they're like, well, I should be vegan because like, look at what's going on our planet. Or, you know, they feel guilty about not making it to the mat, or they feel guilty about, you know, not fitting the stereotype because there are some real world benefits to some of these things. How do you deal with that? And what's your advice for people? Because I think we're all overburdened with guilt.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think guilt plays such a huge part in all of this. And I mean, trust me, I guilt myself too over things. Like one that sits on my conscience a lot is here in France, I don't know why specifically, but recycling is so abnormal here. Okay. Like it's so hard to do. Whereas living in Florida, I mean, my goodness, the city provides you with different bins that you separate, like paper, plastic, glass, whatever. It's just built into your life. It's so easy. Moving here, if you want to recycle, of course you have to separate it yourself, but then you have to walk like a mile and a half to a specific place that recycles things, and you separate it yourself and do all of that. So it's like, listen, all of us have things that the lesson to that story was that I don't do it as much as I really wish I would. And among plenty of other things, but it's like, okay, we have to be a little bit more generous with ourselves and compassionate with ourselves, that you don't have to get it all right all the time. You know, like what's one or two or three things, pick a number that you personally feel really strongly about. And it also goes back to that habit thing where if you say, you know what, I am so guilty, I've got to do yoga every day. I'm going to do a 75-minute class every single day starting Monday. And then you miss the first 3 days because you don't have the time to commit to that. Well, then you're just piling on the guilt. So it's like, what couple of things can you confidently say that these are the things that mean the most to me? And how can you commit to those? And what is what is an accessible version of those commitments that you can stick to. So it's like, as people in the wellness world, we often feel like because we care about some stuff, we should care about everything equally as strongly, and it should all be applicable all the time. And that's just not going to work. So in terms of guilt, I think the first step is just listen, like we said earlier, take your foot off the gas with all this stuff. What are a couple of things that mean the most to you? How can you focus on that and that alone and that first?
I think that's really good advice because it's like scope creep, right? There's so many things. And I think if we can all just say, hey, these are the things that resonate with me the most. These are the top 3 that really matter for me and my community or me and the environment or whatever it is, and get passionate about those things. And the other thing I try to always remind myself of and remind my students is that, yoga's not about judgment. I mean, it's been very interesting for me, especially throughout my pregnancy that I'm going through right now, is just how much doctrine there even is within the yoga community about the way you need to parent, the way you need to breastfeed, the way, and parenting and childbirth, right? These are some of the hottest, most charged topics. And I was so fascinated that like even within the yoga community, very strong opinions were pushed at me. And it felt so un-yogic, right? Like, I mean, it's great to learn about these different perspectives, but, and I think what I'm feeling now is maybe like you said, what a lot of people feel like when they're first just exploring yoga, especially many years ago when it wasn't as mainstream as it is today. So I think judgment is a huge part of it. Like anytime we notice we're judging, whether it's ourselves or someone else, just to remind ourselves that that's not what this practice is about.
Oh, totally. Oh my gosh, I was just like feeling so almost overwhelmed with you, because I think about that a lot. Like, man, to be pregnant and be part of the yoga community. Oh man, what a tough, because it is true. It's like you have all these opinions, very strong opinions, very loud opinions coming at you, who each opinion believes that it is the one and only way and the only correct way. And that's, of course, a slippery slope to be on. And even like, I remember when some of the hurricanes, I mean, they're going on now, it's terrible, but the one that went through Houston, after all of that happened, I remember seeing a bunch of different organizations that people could donate to. So it was like, some were to give diapers, some were clothing, some were underwear for adults, some were, food banks, and some were, humane societies, right? And of course, immediately judgment was flying. It was like, wow, who would give to a dog before a person? And why would you give diapers when people need food? Like all this stuff. And it's like, let's just assume that there's enough people on the planet to be concerned about a lot of different stuff. So it's like, there's no wrong way to help someone, right? Like we can I guess maybe there's some wrong ways, but in general, if your intention is to be helpful and your intention is to fulfill a need that's out there, like then you're doing your part. So judgment just doesn't, it's usually not particularly useful.
No, and I like what you're saying too, which is that we're all individuals and we're all drawn to, my top 3 for the things I really care about, like we were talking before, are going to be different from yours, is going to be different from the person who's listening. And it's sort of like the universe has our back and making us all special snowflakes, right? That the right people are going to be passionate about the right things, and proportionally it's all going to even out. And hopefully we are universally on this trajectory, like towards a better world and planet. Last thing I want to ask you about, along with that big guilt word, is this word of courageousness or having courage, because I think that's something that listeners, and I know I too am really curious to hear about and learn from you, because I think it takes a huge amount of guts to do what you're doing, to talk about yoga the way that you are. And I'm sure it's very comfortable for you now, but I can imagine, or I'm imagining, that years ago, it felt very frightening to put these ideas out here, or maybe it was easy for you. But I think a lot of people, whether it's in their yoga teachers listening and they want to bring more authenticity into their teaching and their practice, or just practitioners who want to speak up more in their daily life and have the courage to state their mind and kind of not worry about other people judging them. What advice do you have? Like, were you scared, like before you started coming out and talking about a lot of these issues, and how did you overcome that, if so?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I want to be like, are you kidding me? I was so scared. And even now it's so not easy. Like I do not feel courageous pretty much ever. Because even, whether you're just starting out or you've built something, it always feels hard. I think, I mean, I've gotten more used to certain things, but it still feels like, oh, I'm nervous to say this. Because when you're starting out, you're like, wow, everyone's going to hate me. But when you have something, you still think, oh my God, everybody I have is going to hate me. So it's still there. All the fear is there 100%. It's just, I think I have pretty great people around me. Like, for example, my business partner, who is very conveniently also my husband, he has always told me like, either, and I don't know if this is an original thought, so we'll just, I don't know, but he's always told me like, you should either be fine with being loved or being hated, but don't ever be neutral. And I think a lot of us really feel like the comfortable place to be is be neutral, especially if we don't think we can be loved by everyone. We definitely fear we might be hated by everyone. So we just err on the side of caution and end up being completely neutral. So we try to please everyone, upset no one. And then where does that leave us? Absolutely nowhere. So I think the thing there is just, it's a cheesy, saying, but like when you feel the fear and do it anyway, it's kind of that, I guess. I'm afraid all the time. Like I am always nervous to say certain things or to put out certain classes or whatever the case may be. But, I mean, you're never going to win everybody over. Just recently, when asked what their least favorite thing about Bad Yogi is, someone literally said Erin. It's like, okay. So, I mean, it's impossible to make everyone happy. And the best thing you can do is just feel that fear, do it anyway, because the people who will resonate with you, like we touched on at the beginning, those people are only going to resonate with the most authentic version of you, not the watered down version, not the fake over the top version, but the most real, the most authentic.
I love that, and I totally agree. It's been so fun to chat with you, and I know a lot of our listeners have a very hardcore practice and are very spiritual, and some are maybe just dabbling and starting their journey. And I think, sending especially people who are very new to yoga your way is a great way, like you said, to kind of get them to be their gateway, to the rest of this. So I'd love for you to just let people know, where can they find you online and what's the best way to stay connected or reach out?
Absolutely. So my home is badyogi.com. Pretty straightforward. There you can find the Perfect Body Yoga program and my courses, my individual classes. There's free resources there too. So lots to pick up on my website. If you're a social media person, you can find me at Bad Yogi Official, pretty much everywhere. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter too. So yeah, those are the places I live. Bad Yogi is my home, but I'm on social media too.
Awesome. Well, Erin, thank you so much for being with us and being so authentic and courageous in yourself. I really enjoyed our conversation. Listeners, let me know what you thought of today's episode. You can go to savannaheast.com/group. That redirects you to our private Facebook group where I can approve you as a member. I'd love to hear your requests for upcoming guests and what you thought about today, since we touched and talked about some pretty controversial topics. So make sure to hop on over there and let's all try to let go of judgment, let go of guilt, and be a little bit more courageous, because we know authenticity always wins in the end. I hope you have a beautiful, light-filled, yoga-filled day. From my heart to yours, namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaheast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode. And thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.